Germany, the economic powerhouse
Yeah.
of Europe. But we came across this YouTube video, and they're saying that Germany is maybe on the brink of recession and possibly even, get this, leaving the EU. So
Yeah.
buckle up, because today we're going to deep dive into all of that. We'll unpack how we got here, the energy crisis, the political upheaval, and this party, the AfD, that's really shaking things up over there.
Yeah, it really is a pretty remarkable turnaround when you think about it. For the longest time, Germany was, the symbol of stability in Europe. But now Dexit, a German exit from the EU, is like a real topic of conversation.
Okay, so let's back up for a sec. Why should we, or really anyone outside of Germany, care about all of this?
Well, Germany has been a driving force in the EU pretty much from the very beginning, and not just economically, but also politically. Their manufacturing, especially their cars and machinery, has been a huge part of, the EU's export strength.
Great in Germany. That used to mean something, right?
Oh, absolutely. And their commitment to European integration has always been seen as like unshakable. They were founding members of the EU, helped design the euro. It's a huge shift from that Germany, to the one we're seeing now.
Speaking of shifts, what about that period back in the early 2000s when Germany was called the sick man of Europe? What was going on back then?
Yeah, that was a crucial turning point, I think. Even with their economic strength, Germany was getting complacent.
Yeah.
Their labor market was rigid. There were just too many regulations, stifling new ideas, and they were falling behind in the global marketplace.
So then they brought in the Agenda 2010 reforms. Those were pretty controversial, weren't they?
Oh, they were, absolutely. The idea was to shake up the job market, scale back on welfare and get more people working. And while there were some initial benefits when it came to economic growth, there are some pretty long-lasting consequences that are still being felt today.
Like what specifically?
Well, one major consequence was that the gap between the rich and the poor got wider. And there was this big increase in what we call, precarious employment jobs with low wages, not much security, and very few benefits. It was kind of like they traded short-term economic relief for these deep-rooted social problems that are really coming back to bite them now.
And then you had the 2008 financial crisis. How did Germany handle that?
They actually weathered it relatively well. Their reliance on exports kind of helped them bounce back quickly since there was so much global demand for their high-quality products,
But that same reliance on exports could also be seen as a weakness, right?
Exactly. It made them super vulnerable to any fluctuations in the global market. If China's economy slows down, Germany feels it. Plus, because they were so focused on exports, they didn't really pay enough attention to their domestic demand and consumption, so it created this imbalance in their economy.
So they were basically set up for a fall when the next crisis hit. And wow, did it ever hit. Walk us through the events that tipped Germany over the edge.
Well, the pivotal moment really was when Russia decided to cut off the gas supplies that were going through Ukraine at the beginning of 2025. This was a total blow to Germany, which had been, really reliant on Russian gas for decades. Like a whopping 55% of their energy came from Russia.
That's a lot of faith in one supplier, to say the least.
Oh, it was a major strategic miscalculation that is definitely coming back to haunt them now. And this energy crisis came on top of all these other pre-existing economic issues, supply chain problems, and aging population. And they've been lagging behind in technological advancements, especially in key areas like digitalization and, green technologies.
So what's the impact been like on, the average German?
Their GDP has been shrinking for 2 years straight. Industrial production, the heart of their economy, is in decline. And even their car industry, the one they're famous for, is really struggling. They're facing competition from all over the world and finding it hard to adapt to, the electric vehicle revolution.
I read that Volkswagen, one of their big car companies, is closing plants and laying people off. That's a bad sign.
It is. And to add to that, the number of companies going insolvent has just skyrocketed. In the last quarter of 2024 alone, over 4,200 companies in Germany went bankrupt. That's a 36% increase from the year before.
Those are some really alarming numbers. So we've got this backdrop of economic fear and uncertainty. And historically, when people are scared and looking for answers, that's when you tend to see these extremist political movements gain traction.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing in Germany right now. And the movement that's, making the most noise is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany Party.
So let's dive into that a bit. Who is the AfD? What are they all about? And why are they gaining so much popularity so quickly?
Well, the AfD is a populist party, and they've been really successful at tapping into the anxieties and frustrations of a pretty large segment of the German population. They offer these simple, often radical solutions to really complex problems. They blame everything on immigrants, the EU, and the elite.
What kind of policies are they pushing for?
Some of their proposals are pretty extreme. They're advocating for Germany to leave the EU, which they're calling Dexit, and ditch the euro. They want to buddy back up with Russia, restart the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, and put in place huge tax cuts. They call it their Blue Deal.
Wait, they want to get closer to Russia after everything that's happened.
Yeah. They see Russia as a key energy partner and believe Germany would be better off cooperating with Russia than, going against them. And they say that the EU sanctions against Russia are hurting Germany more than they're hurting Putin.
That's a very controversial stance, to say the least. What about this Blue Deal? What does that involve?
Imagine like a libertarian's dream. The Blue Deal is basically slashing taxes across the board, reduce the corporate tax rate to just 10%, get rid of the trade tax entirely, and lower the value-added tax down to 15%. They claim this will boost economic growth and create all these new jobs.
Sounds a little too good to be true. What are economists saying about it?
Most economists are very skeptical. They're saying that these kinds of huge tax cuts would blow a hole in the budget and create these massive deficits. And they're not convinced that the tax cuts would actually stimulate the economy. They think it'll probably just help the rich while everyone else gets left behind.
So it's a big gamble. What about immigration? That's been a really hot-button issue in Germany for years, especially after that refugee crisis.
The AfD has an extremely hardline stance on immigration. They want to deport undocumented immigrants and significantly reduce the number of refugees allowed into the country.
So they're appealing to some uh, deep-seated fears and prejudices there. But it's one thing to, talk the talk. It's another thing to win an election and actually get to put these policies into place. How much of a threat is the AfD, really?
Well, that's the big question, right? Their popularity has definitely been climbing, and they're currently polling at, record highs. But whether they can turn that into electoral success is another matter entirely.
With the snap election coming up, things could get very interesting. We've got this rising tide of populism and economic anxiety. So what does this all mean for Germany, and what kind of impact could this have on the EU as a whole? Could Germany actually leave the European Union?
That's the question everyone's asking, isn't it? And it's a question with some potentially huge consequences. So let's explore what a Dexit might actually look like and what it could mean for you. The whole idea of Dexit was unthinkable just a few years ago, and now it's something people are seriously talking about. I think that says a lot about how serious this situation is.
Let's imagine for a minute that Germany actually goes through with this and leaves the EU. What would that even look like?
Well, the immediate impact on the economy would be huge. Economists are estimating that Germany could lose something like 10% of their total economic output. We're talking maybe 400 to 500 billion euros every year.
Whoa, that's a lot of money. What about the impact on the rest of the EU?
It would be devastating. Germany is the economic engine of the EU. They contribute a ton to the EU budget. If they left, it would leave this power vacuum and probably trigger a domino effect. You'd see other Eurosceptic movements in other countries start to gain ground.
There was this really striking quote I saw in Newsweek. They said that a weak Germany also means a weak European Union. If things go badly in Germany, the whole continent is looking at a decade of stagnation.
I think that pretty much sums it up. The EU's core ideals, unity and shared prosperity, those would be in serious jeopardy.
And zooming out a little bit, what about the rest of the world? After all, Germany is one of the biggest economies out there.
Oh, for sure. Dexit would send shockwaves through the entire global financial system. It would disrupt trade relationships, probably weaken the euro, and embolden countries like Russia and China.
So it sounds like Dexit is something that pretty much no one actually wants to see happen.
You're right. But just the fact that people are seriously considering it shows how fragile things have become. You can really see how much this economic crisis and all the political turmoil has damaged Germany's faith in the whole EU project.
So with all of that said, just how likely is Dexit really? Are we talking about a real possibility, or is it more of a worst-case scenario?
Right now, most experts think that Dexit is still pretty unlikely. There's a lot of opposition within Germany, even among people who are critical of the EU.
And Germany has benefited a lot from being a member of the EU, haven't they?
Yeah, without a doubt. But, we can't ignore all of these warning signs. The AFD is gaining ground and public opinion is shifting. If things keep getting worse with the economy and the AFD is able to successfully exploit people's fears, the pressure to leave could get really overwhelming.
So we're definitely in uncharted territory. And just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated, we've got another factor to consider. Elon Musk. He's decided to weigh in on German politics.
Yeah, Elon Musk has come out and said that he supports the AFD. He's even been talking to their leader, Alice Weidel, on social media.
I have to admit, that was a pretty surprising development. Why would he get involved in German politics? What's he hoping to get out of this?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely raised a lot of eyebrows. Some people are saying that he sees an opportunity to, help his own business interests in Germany, maybe by aligning himself with a party that's not a big fan of environmental regulations.
So you're saying maybe it's a case of profits over principles.
It's possible, but there are also people who are saying that he's just drawn to the AFD's anti-establishment message and sees them as, like, shaking things up.
Musk has never been afraid to do things his own way.
That's for sure. But his endorsement of the AFD has caused quite a backlash. German officials have accused him of trying to influence their elections. Some are even calling it a threat to their democracy.
It's a very delicate situation. And Musk getting involved has really just made things more complicated. Do you think his endorsement is going to actually help the AFD win the election?
It's tough to say for sure. On the one hand, having him back them up might give them some legitimacy and bring in voters who might not have considered supporting a far-right party before. But on the other hand, it could also backfire and alienate more moderate voters.
It's definitely a risky move for both Musk and the AFD. And speaking of risky moves, let's not forget that Donald Trump is about to start his second term as president in the U.S. How could that affect what's going on in Germany?
That's another really important piece of the puzzle. Trump's America First agenda and his tendency to side with leaders like Putin could have major consequences all over the world, especially in Europe.
Can you remind us what happened to the relationship between the U.S. and Europe during Trump's first term?
Yeah, a lot of the things he did really strained relationships with America's European allies. He weakened NATO, pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and, he had that really close relationship with Putin, which made a lot of people worried about Russia interfering in U.S. elections. His whole approach really disrupted things on the world stage.
And a lot of people are afraid that his second term could be even more disruptive. How could that specifically affect Germany?
Trump's whole nationalist stance and his potential alliance with Russia could really destabilize the EU and embolden the AfD. He might even try to encourage Germany to leave the EU because he might think that a weaker EU would be good for the US.
That's not good. So we've got this already volatile situation in Germany with the economic crisis, the AfD becoming more popular and the possibility of Dexit, and now we've got to add Trump coming back into power to the mix. It's a really complicated and unpredictable situation.
It really is. There's a lot at stake here, and not just for Germany, but for the whole world. The next few months are going to be crucial for figuring out whether Germany can survive this and come out stronger, or whether they're going to be pulled apart by all this division and instability.
It's a lot to think about, this economic pressure, all of the political stuff going on,
Yeah.
and now Trump's back.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
But the thing is, Germany isn't the only country going through all of this. We're seeing like this wave of populism and nationalism all across Europe. And it's all driven by people being anxious about the economy, immigration, and they're just, disillusioned with how things are.
So is Germany like a warning sign for the rest of Europe? Like the canary in a coal mine?
I think in a lot of ways, yeah. What's happening in Germany could definitely happen in other European countries. I mean, if Germany, with their strong economy and their commitment to the EU, starts to fall apart, it could set off this chain reaction.
Okay, so let's talk about you, the listener. Why should you care about all of this? What's the takeaway here?
Well, practically speaking, if things are unstable in Germany economically and politically, that's going to affect you. It could affect trade, investments, even your travel plans.
And on a bigger level.
I think what's happening in Germany really forces us to ask some big questions, like what's going to happen to democracy? What's the role of globalization? And how are we going to deal with these huge, complicated issues like climate change and economic inequality?
Yeah, it really shows how interconnected the world is and how what happens in one place can have a ripple effect everywhere.
Absolutely. And it shows how important it is to stay informed, to talk about this stuff and really think it through and not just go for these easy answers or point fingers at scapegoats.
That's a good point. So
Yeah.
we've covered a lot today. Germany's at a crossroads, the AfD is getting more and more popular, and the EU's future is up in the air. And then you've got Trump coming back into power on top of everything else.
It's complicated and things are changing fast. But if we can understand the history, the key people involved, and what might happen next, I think we can start to make sense of it all.
And hopefully be a little more ready for what's coming.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And in times like these, we need all the power we can get.
We talked a lot about what could happen if Germany decides to leave the EU. But here's something else to think about. What if other countries see Germany leave and decide to leave too? What would happen to Europe then? And what would that mean for the whole world?
It's a serious question and one that we should really be thinking about.
We really want to know what you think about all of this. Join the conversation on our social media and tell us your thoughts. This is a conversation that needs to keep going.
Absolutely. Let's keep talking.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.